Hello everyone. In this video, we will be discussing more about efficient frontier. In the last video, we have seen an efficient frontier of two assets. And in this video, we will see an efficient frontier of multiple assets. By the way, you know that efficient frontier is a weighted combinations of different assets in a portfolio. In practice, you are not limited to investing in just two stocks. For example, you could decide to choose a portfolio from the 10 stocks in this table. After analyzing the prospectus of each firm, you come up with forecast of their returns, and you're most optimistic about Ford. You can see it has the highest expected return compared to all other, and you are pretty much cautious about, I would say, Campbell Soup because it offers the lowest rate of return among these 10 stocks. Now, typically you will use data for the past, let's say 5 to 10 years to estimate the risk of each stock and the correlation between the returns on each pair of stocks. Now, if you look at this graph, each diamond, you can see here a lot of diamonds, each diamond marks the combination of risk and return offered by a different individual security. For example, if you look at this diamond, it shows the highest standard deviation and the highest expected return, which was the case of Ford. Am I right? On the other hand, the diamond here, that shows the lowest standard deviation as well as that's the lowest return, I would say, not the lowest standard deviation. Okay. Now what happens is that by holding different proportion of these 10 securities, you can obtain an even wider selection of risk and return. So if you have a combination of these securities, you can achieve any area within this part. Okay. So now you need to decide that which combination is best for you. But that depends on what is your goal, which direction do you want to go. Okay, now one thing is pretty obvious, you understand. Let me erase them. One point is pretty obvious. What is that? First of all, you want to go left, right? Why left? Because as you go left, the standard deviation is lower. That means you have less risk. And also you want to go up. Why? Because as you go up, your rate of return is higher. Is that all right? So the point here is you want to go left as far as you can, and you want to go up as up as possible. And you want a point in any of these point in this red line, which will be an efficient portfolio. Now, any point in this red line will be the different combination of these stocks in your portfolio. So each point in this line is an efficient portfolio according to Markowitz theory. Now, why we are calling an efficient portfolio each of these points? Because if you take any point, it represents the highest expected return for this given level of risk. For example, you can see at this point, this is the highest expected rate of return. If you take this point, that shows the highest expected rate of return for this level of the risk. Okay, so any point in this red line is an efficient portfolio. Now, as I told you in the past video, that which point you take, that depends on your appetite towards risk. Now, one point you need to understand that you should not invest here. Why not? Because at this level of risk, higher return is possible. That's why our efficient frontier basically starts, our efficient frontier does not start from here, rather our efficient frontier starts from here. Why? Because that's the maximum return at this level of risk, and then efficient frontier goes along this line. Okay, and this is the point where you get highest return for the highest level of risk. Okay, so once again I remind you that which point you invest, that depends on how risk averse you are. If you are a highly risk averse investor, you will invest in a point where there are low risk, low return. And if you are less risk averse investor, you will invest in a point where there are high risk and high return. Now, so far our discussion was based on an assumption that we invest only our own fund. However, in reality, in the capital market, it's also possible that we can borrow money and we can invest. Now, for simplicity here, we assume that we borrow and lend at a risk-free rate of return. And in that case, you will have a portfolio that represents a combination of your risky portfolio and the risk-free rate of return, and that's known as optimal risky portfolio. An optimal risky portfolio is the tangency point of your efficient frontier and this line, which is known as security market line, we will be discussing shortly. So the tangency point between these two lines is known as the optimal risky portfolio, once again, which represents a combination of the risk-free rate and the risky portfolio. So as an investor, we will strive to invest in this point when we combine both risk-free assets and risky assets in our portfolio. Now, another concept we want to introduce here, this is the efficient frontier. We already know that each point of this efficient frontier indicates a different combination of the stocks in the portfolio, and which point we invest, that depend on our appetite towards risk. Now, you understand that it's not necessary that you have only one efficient frontier in your universe of investment. Okay, let's take that this is an efficient frontier for a portfolio where you have stocks only, I mean equities. Now, what if suddenly you decide that you will introduce other assets in your portfolio? For example, currencies, real estate, bonds, and so on. Now, as you invest in different assets in your portfolio, what happens is your efficient frontier will move leftward. Okay. Now, what's the implication that efficient frontier moves leftward? The implication is you can see that at this level of risk, where previously you could earn a return of here, now for the same level of risk, you can earn a return of here. Am I right? So for the same level of risk, you can earn higher return. On the other hand, you can see that if you take the same level of return, for example, here, if you take same level of return, previously you could earn this level of return for this level of risk. Now you can earn this return with a much lower risk. You can see that you reduce your risk by this amount. Okay, so it actually indicates that when you invest in different asset classes, not only equities, for example, bonds, real estates, or other, if you invest in different asset class, so what happens is you reduce the riskiness of your portfolio further. Okay, the reason is intuitive. When you invest only in equities, that is pretty much riskier, because the equities will move together. Equities tend to move together towards a particular information or particular shock in the market. However, if your portfolio includes different asset class, for example, equities, bonds, currencies, real estate, then their correlation will be much lower, because for the same information, your equities and your real estate may not move together, rather they can move in a different direction. That's why a portfolio of different asset class will have lower risk compared to a portfolio that has only one type of assets. So as I have said that as we move leftward for introducing different asset classes, we reduce our riskiness. Now, how we can examine the performance of our portfolio? This is one ratio we can use, which is called Sharpe Ratio. This is the return on the portfolio and risk-free rate, and this is the standard deviation of the portfolio. So Sharpe Ratio basically indicates how much risk-adjusted return you earn from your portfolio. Okay, so a higher Sharpe Ratio of a portfolio indicates that your risk-adjusted return is higher compared to another portfolio which has a relatively lower Sharpe Ratio. Now, as I already indicated that of an efficient portfolio, of an efficient frontier, which point you invest, that depends on your appetite towards risk. For example, if you are here, you are a high risk, high return investor, or if you are here, you are a low risk, low return investor. Okay, so you decide that which portion of the efficient frontier you will invest based on your degree of risk aversion. So that's the end of our discussion on efficient frontier. In the next video, we will be talking about security market line. Thank you very much.